There are three particles in an atom that we study at GCSE. The electron, which is very, very, very small, it has a negative charge. So just imagine it's the negative end of a magnet. And these things fly around the atom like crazy people, like madmen. Now, there is also in the nucleus protons, and they're much bigger than the electrons. They are positive, so they obviously attract the electrons, and the electrons attract the protons. So electrons negative, protons positive. And the protons sit in the middle of the atom in the nucleus alongside the neutron, which is also big, but it's neutral, it's not negative nor positive, it's just neutral, hence the name neutron. And it sits in the nucleus with the protons. So those are the three particles. Electrons, which whiz about like crazy people, tiny, without mass, really. Protons in the center in the nucleus, big, positive. And the neutrons also in the nucleus with the protons with a neutral charge. Now, we need to remember, when we're looking at the periodic table, a few phrases. So, if we want to know how many electrons there are, the answer, the number, is the smaller number in the periodic table. It's what we call the atomic number, if you want to remember that, but it's the smaller number. How many electrons are there? Look on the periodic table, find the element, and it's the smaller number that gives you that answer. So the electrons, smaller number. How many protons are there? Again, find the element in the periodic table. The answer is the smaller number, so, which, as we said before, is the atomic number. So how many protons are there? Look at there, find the smaller number of the two, and that is your answer. Always the smaller number. Electrons, the smaller number. Protons, the smaller number. So how many neutrons? The answer is, and you have to do a little bit of maths, you can't just read a number for the neutrons. So the answer is the bigger number that you can find in the periodic table minus the smaller number which you can find in the periodic table. Now the bigger number we call the mass number, and the smaller number, as we said before, we call the atomic number. But we'll just call them big number and small number. So to find the number of electrons, it's the small number. So if the small number says 7, the answer is 7. If it says 10, the answer is 10. So it's always the smaller of the two numbers. The same for the protons, it's always the smaller of the two numbers, because there has to be the same number of electrons as there are protons, just the way it works. For the neutrons, you have to take the smaller number away from the bigger number, so you have to do a little bit of simple math. So here, in the PowerPoint, we've got lithium with two numbers. The bigger number is 7, and the smaller number is 3. So we can use our phrases now. How many electrons? The smaller number is 3, so there are 3 electrons. How many protons? The smaller number is the number of protons, so there are 3 protons as well. How many neutrons? So we need to take the smaller number away from the bigger number. So the bigger number is 7. We subtract the smaller number, 3, and we end up with the answer that's 4. So there are 4 neutrons. Now the bigger number is how heavy that atom is. Now, saying how heavy is totally scientifically wrong. We have to use the word mass, but in your head, if you find it easy to say heavy. So 7 is the number of protons and neutrons together. Here's oxygen. So there's a bigger number and a smaller number. How many electrons, how many protons, and how many neutrons? If you can figure that out on your own. So remember the phrases. You can go back and look at the other PowerPoint if you want. There's the slide before. Now here is sodium. Same again. You've got a bigger number and a smaller number. How many electrons, how many protons, and how many neutrons? Figure it out for yourself using the phrases from the first slide. Now, the bigger number is the weight of the atom, and you can't really see it, so that is the mass in scientific terms, not how heavy. So how heavy is carbon? Find carbon on the periodic table, find the biggest number, and that tells you how heavy carbon is. That is the mass of carbon. So for example, here we can look at a molecule and say how heavy is water. H2O is water, as everybody knows. H2O, that means there are 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. H2, so 2 H's, 2 hydrogens, and an oxygen. So 2 lots of hydrogen and 1 lot of oxygen. We look at the periodic table, we find hydrogen, its biggest number is 1, and oxygen, its biggest number is 16. There are 2 hydrogens, so 1 plus 1, plus a 16, because that's how heavy, that's the mass of oxygen. Add them all together and 18. So water has a mass of 18. And that's how we do that sort of stuff. Use the periodic table, find the bigger numbers for the mass, and that is how it works.